So we've kind of started this morning already with the use of generative AI for identification. What I want to talk about is how all of these technologies are really going to change our understanding of nature and influence people's really knowledge of what's real. And that's going to be something that all of us have to navigate. And just for a little background, I am Dr. Anastasia. I run the Text and Technology PhD program at the University of Central Florida. I'm a professor of English, but my focus is really on digital culture. So I work a lot on how every time we have a new technology or platform that looks really enticing, like Facebook or Twitter, what are the implications for that and how it potentially changes our life? And with that in mind, I'm going to bring that perspective to this in terms of how, especially environmental organizations, any of you who are moderators for the social media for a chapter, or just reposting content, have kind of a personal opportunity to intervene in what is going to be a slew of misinformation about the environment that is already happening. So I've already used one term that I want to unpack for a moment because it does potentially carry a lot of baggage, and that is generative AI. Have any of you heard that term, generative AI, before? A lot of you? Okay, so if you haven't, you've probably heard the term AI, which had that really broad science fiction-y appeal. You'll hear people talking about how we're going to create something and it's going to be self-aware. We're going to have a Skynet moment for our Terminator fans in the room. That's not what I'm talking about when we talk about generative AI. Generative AI is very specifically what happens when we have a whole bunch of cultural objects, whether it's text, video, images, basically anything we can generate a whole bunch of data on, our whole cultural history, that is then fed into a model that can produce objects like it by learning across the data set. Similar to what Dr. Stevens has already described around how we identify plants, it will also draw plants for you and try to give us information and text, which can be quite wrong because it's working across all of these objects, but not understanding the material natural world. So the most famous example of generative AI right now is ChatGPT. OpenAI has done a wonderful job of taking over our popular imagination and is very good at releasing things for free right now to try to get people hooked on its two models. The GPT side is its text generation, and then DALL-E is its image generation. We're going to be talking about a bunch of things that are produced, not just with that, but with a whole lot of competitors and tools like it. So this is a very profitable ecosystem right now. And just for context, every type of media we experience can be changed by generative AI. So this is generated video and generated sounds. It's an imaginary of the scrub from one of the free models because I refuse to pay for the good video models, and a lot of them are in private beta anyway. But you can already start to get the sense of some of the understanding it has and doesn't have of the Florida landscape, of its sounds. And one of the things to realize is that I generated that with a couple of sentences, let it run over in another browser, and then export it and threw it in the slideshow. And it's that ease of generation that is going to contribute to having so many fake things all over your social media. It's faster than it has ever been.
Does it have a certain file type?
I
mean, when you say you moved it from here to here.
So I saved it as a video file. So
And video.
Yeah, so that's a video generation tool.
There's no, it's just video file.
Yeah, and that's one of the things to realize. These things won't necessarily look at all fake. And there's a lot of things you can do right now that are very sophisticated. So if you've heard the old advice, I'll count the fingers and things like that, that is already not true. And it is rapidly getting better. So these are the numbers from the Association of Computing Machinery of Generative AI. And this is last summer's report. I'm waiting for this summer's numbers. But the things I want you to really notice here are it took 65 months for 100 million users to pick up Twitter. It took 2 months to reach that milestone of ChatGPT. So for those of us who teach or look at social media for information, everything in those spaces is changing as a result of this. And there's lots of AI generated articles, and Google just completely ruined their search engine. All of these changes are very rapidly happening. There's lots of cool stuff you can do with it, but there's also a lot that's dangerous about it. So how we understand the ecosystem, and of course, the stuff the team's already talked about, there's an incredible impact in terms of the amount of electricity consumed. 3.4 gigawatt hours of electricity just to train Google's Palm model, which you probably haven't even heard of for 2 months, much less all the new models OpenAI keeps rolling out every few months to stay cool. So we are really talking about something that is going to change every software package you use on your computer. Microsoft, how many Windows users in the room? Yeah, and Apple, don't worry, Apple's a little behind, but they're getting there really fast. Right, Windows has already rolled out a lot of what it calls its Copilot ecosystem, which is these sorts of tools into all of its software products. Adobe, any Photoshop, Premiere users, everything in that space. If you're developing content, there are going to be AI tools in that space, and they're going to be really able to do really awesome things. Especially with removing objects from a photo, altering objects in a photo, giving you really great looking photos in some cases. And that's part of what makes that kind of so dangerous. I mentioned Google is completely messed up at search. One thing to realize is that Google now by default is rolled out AI-based search results that are working from these sorts of models. And these have very mixed results, depending upon which data they're pulling from, which data got prioritized in its search engine. It means that a lot of things that were sponsored by companies that have been kind of in training data sets around things like fertilizer or what plants are best for an area can pop up in your search results. It can also often be very generic, or as you can see, very kind of commercially focused and kind of confused about what it recommends to you. So a good way to think about this is that Google is a for-profit company and ultimately is working very hard on partnering with people to sell you things. And its AI model is similarly going to be more interested in that than it is perhaps in what's real. So we're kind of in an interesting space when we kind of see how especially disputed information and science and things that we are all kind of trying to advocate for potentially in our communities are now questions that people are often going to answer first with these sorts of tools. And this is something I see a lot with my students, where they'll go and ask a question first to ChatGPT and think they have an answer. So my data play close to the room. How do you feel, you and Vito, with thoughts on my 5 recommended plants from ChatGPT? This is its newest model, so it's a lot better than it was a little while ago. They're all plants. It's a good start.
Not a range.
Yeah.
Like that would form a canopy or anything like that.
Exactly. It's not gonna help people necessarily make those next leaps. It's going to reflect back the most popular information out there, right? Quantity of things in its data set, things that have been repeated over and over again, just like people, to some extent, that can start to carry a level of truth. And so it's not that it's terrible advice, it's just that this is, it's a shortcut that risks becoming people's absolute. And when you get into things that are hot debates on which there are, say, a lot of hot takes going around, like tropical milkweed, you can get some really interesting kind of responses around, how to fix in this. Again, it shows how much these models have improved very quickly. This is the latest model's response in the tropical milkweed debate. So he's not going to know about that University of Georgia guy. Have you seen that article? I want you to kill all your milkweed. But it knows about the conversations around the crisis, and it is trying to summarize it. But one of the problems with this sort of response and ChatGPT, particularly as a default, is this doesn't give you any sources. Right? You'll notice that when the Florida Native Plant Society circulated their response on something that's critical, it is filled with citations. You have a way to validate where that information comes from. What's often missing in these sorts of responses is any aid in taking that next step. There are other models that do give you citations and are a little better at this process. And that's one of the things that I see a lot of arguments about around this, is the extent to which there's credibility required.
I've also seen fake sites
Oh, many.
that do, and it looks like it's the real
Yeah.
thing, but you copy and paste that into a search engine and try to find that, and it does not.
And the newer models are much better about that. But for a little while, when this became very popular, I started getting these weird emails. Can I get this article from you? You wrote it in this journal. I'm like, hate to tell you this, that journal doesn't exist. That sounds plausibly like something I would have written. I agree with you. This is a very convincing fake citation, and it's me, and it's on, digital narratives. So yeah, sure. If there was a journal of, plants, technology, and games, then maybe I wrote this, but there isn't. So, and of course, educators are dealing with that one. And it's very difficult. Libraries, right? This is a conversation that's happening across every space where reliability is important. And it doesn't help that our image models have gotten better and better as we go, right? So these are two examples of the types of things that you often see in AI output. These are, of course, the threats to all of our native plant artists in terms of and native species office and all of your Florida art. You're going to see a whole lot more of this stuff on t-shirts and promoted to you, and a whole lot fewer artists being paid for their work because it's incredibly rapid. And you can also start to see how the photorealism is getting better and better. Like, you look at this and, it has the Adobe Firefly little mark at the bottom to tell you it's fake right now, but I can easily remove that. And, right? If you just saw that somewhere passing by in your social media feed, which this little Adobe Firefly mark to tell you that it was created with Adobe's.
You wouldn't see it on a computer screen in your phone.
Yeah, and I could have cropped that out. I could have done a million things to remove it. I left it in because I want you to know that that's one way you can recognize a quickly created image, but that's very far from being an identifier you can rely upon. And it gets even more tricky when we talk about the types of tools that are popular right now. So this is an image I took of a scrub day over in Lansing, one of our couple of trips. So it's a real photo. Yeah. A real photo. And I asked Adobe Firefly to expand it. Yeah. So this is my real photo. And
Wow.
it is only that is a third of what you're seeing. Would you know that? No. And that's, if you take one thing away from this talk, please take away the reality that you are not going to know what a photo has been changed by AI just by looking at it. Unless somebody did a bad job. But you can't rely on that. There's no, I can't teach you, here's 3 tricks for spotting AI generated nature photography. Because if I did, they'd be out of date in a month. And because this type of tool that is content aware, that is working on real photos, is getting so much more powerful so quickly that we can take and edit our photography within ease. It is going to be really interesting in terms of kind of what it produces for visuals and film editing, but it's also going to make producing this sort of that is and is not Lyonia illusion rapidly.
They even added imperfections, like
Yes.
not all the leaves are completely green, and there's
Like,
Oh, yeah. What's the purpose of a function like expand?
so one of
the size of the
yeah. So let's say I want to use this on the Couplet Fern website. We have that header that's mobile responsive, and I want the scrub day to be centered. Now I've got a header. So people are going to do this for utility. You can also do it because let's say you took a shot and you took it at a weird angle because there were people there and you wanted the nice nature shot. You can fill it in. You're going to eliminate all of the people from your shots of Cinderella's castle, right? And a good Photoshop artist could have done that before, to be clear. I am not a good Photoshop artist, and I can now do this in a second And that's really what's going to change the speed with which you can make these sorts of very dramatic pieces. And like things like this, you know, it's pretty cool. Like, I'm a technology person. It's fascinating. But I think it also really speaks to the fact that when I take that image outside, this is Adobe Firefly.
Oh,
Yes. And Adobe's tools are going to be kind of the most impressive for manipulating images right now, and video for that matter.
But they're very expensive. That's a pretty expensive.
Firefly you can try out for free right now. So if you're
For
curious,
like 7 days or something.
no, right now it's in a public free beta. That's like OpenAI. What they want is to hook you. They'll charge you later. But I do recommend trying Firefly, especially if you're interested in sort of work, because when you see it yourself, with this type of manipulation, it really gives you that setting, okay, now I take this image out of that context. If I were to throw this in my photos folder, would I even remember? So, one of the places where we see the biggest problem with this, of course, is on social media.
Yeah.
Right? Because you see something cool, it's going through one of your bird groups or plant group.
Usually there's somebody that can call it, you know, which was.
Yeah, and
It's not real,
you'll see people who are doing that, but you also see things like this. The Santa Cardinal circulated through a whole ton of Facebook groups. And even though a few people called it out on the comments, how many people go and read the comments before they hit repost, like, look at this cool bird in another group? Not that many. This is a really good time to become a person who reads those comments and starts noticing things. Because one of the biggest things we all can do is when something is circulating through our groups that's in an AI hoax image, if you have the knowledge of the actual material world to call it out, then that's your opportunity to educate. Knowledge of the material world is actually our best way to combat this sort of thing. To say, okay, I know that looks like fun, and it was well done, right? This was not, a lot of what you'll see, I have these smaller, because they're bad. A lot of what you'll see is content mills that are just trying to get free blogs for various purposes, and they're not great. They're just generating constantly lots of images in hopes one will stick and circulate. But when you see people take the time of using the top model, working through their results and trying to get the one they think is going to be the most convincing and have the most hooks, it's going to look the most like the nature photography that's circulating, that's the sort of thing that tends to get traction.
And comments might not even work because, Facebook, you can top comments most of the time, and the last time I looked, I had 97 comments on one thing that I was looking at. But there was only like 2 that Facebook didn't share.
And and you have to switch it to the all comments view to get the rest of that information, which is another step that makes it less likely we'll get to that information. Remember, social media is designed intentionally around getting you to recirculate those things. They don't care what you're recirculating. They care how much time you're spending.
Hitting that like button will move it up into your feed faster than anything else will.
Absolutely. And this is a real concern that every organization is dealing with around their nature photography contest, right? So we have, of course, here, the real grand prize winning photo and the AI generated imitation of that photo. Any place that takes submissions of content, nature photography, is one of the biggest, because you can take your not great photo and make it better and better with these tools. For one, even if you lose some of the things that actually make it distinctively that actual bird or species along the way.
It's a little out of perspective, though.
Yeah.
That one was right.
Yeah, they could have done better. But also, this article was summer 2023 that Audubon first started the alarm. It was the first time they were having problems with their nature photography. And it's already better.
If I had taken just the little tools that I have and created that picture, was that AI generated or was that me generated?
So the question around, text to image generation, right now you can't copyright the results of text to image generation for a lot of purposes, because the output is the output of the model. you've given it a few kind of commands. But what it's created is fundamentally something that's been trained on a giant data set of other people's stuff. Now, where things get tricky and interesting is when you look at things like all of Adobe's tools, right? Many of those tools are similar to tools photographers and filmmakers were already using. So you can work on top of that and use these sorts of tools to do things like with extensions, et cetera. Is that still my photo? Yeah, it's still something, but it's not a photo anymore. It's, and that murky space is going to be where we see all of the legal battles fought over the next few years. As every profession is trying to figure out how do we kind of handle this and what it's going to do to creative work. And
How is it making our life better?
well,
If you're gonna be submitting unreal stuff all the time, you know, that's generated by AI, so I really understand that part of it.
so we can kind of have this argument over any technology, right? So did Facebook is in many ways one of the most destructive platforms that's ever been on. I can tell you about the cases where Facebook has been used as a key part of genocide in other countries. We can walk through the misinformation campaigns around elections around the world. Facebook has also been incredibly useful for individuals in circulation of revenge porn, stalking, doxing, which is a form of attack where you can find out people's real information, swatting, where you can get people's address and then send a SWAT team to their house by calling in a fake attack, which can get people killed. But we haven't stopped using Facebook, right? Any of you are in the Native Plant Society's groups? Anyone? I mean, I have some people who completely given up Facebook because of all of these things, but it's rare because there's a lot of other things it offers for community. And I believe, as Dr. Stevens asked earlier, how many of you are using iNaturalist? That's an AI tool. And right, that's an example of using it to identify plants. But some of the same things, some of the same principles here can be used to work across an entire set of scans of different tumors and improve our odds of diagnosis. So we have to be cautious about how we think about this type of technology and recognize that it really does matter how people are using it, what the context is, what the level of risk is of the misinformation. Right, and there are going to be cases where it's more dangerous than others. Does it matter that people are reposting some of these things and think they're birds? Well, somewhat. It matters if they, if that's how what shapes, especially kids' understanding of the natural world. It matters when things circulated that are hoaxes, like here's this extinct bird and it showed up in my backyard. It matters when it creates confusion about habitat and our relationship with things, or it makes us value the real thing less because all of the kind of cooler looking things are around. It matters when people who are trusted sources of content, like this landscape photographer who started replacing his entire feed with generative images, was actually a little alarmed when people didn't notice. It matters in our research journals in Nature, where they've taken a very strong stance about allowing any sort of generative content. Because in those spaces, it's shaping people's real understanding of the science in ways that can cause genuine misunderstanding when other people build upon and trust that information because we're where it's bound. But if you go look at Kyle Frost's Instagram, yeah, right, it's normally nature photography, right? So established credibility, an established audience that wasn't used to looking at those photos, expecting fakes, and a bunch of convincing fakes. So suddenly you're telling people, oh, this is what Norway looks like. This is unimportant, you know, and people are seeing that, and it can be used in all sorts of kind of troubling ways. You'll see it in groups where they're saying, oh, the polar ice caps are fine. Look, here's a happy polar bear. Yeah. So things like that are very real use cases for miscommunication. And of course, we also have a serious problem in academia. Because all of my professors and grad students in the room will tell you that there's a lot of pressure in academia to publish a lot, to have interesting results, to have things that circulate. There are a lot of people who get in these jobs, and it turns out that they don't have the time or energy left after teaching a high course load to do that discovery, or they've got the pressure of headline, or they're just cynically trying to build a reputation. And we have, this is the May 14th article, just 19 article journals completely shuttered due to the massive amounts of fake submissions. Now, this doesn't happen in a bubble. It happens through a whole bunch of cynical players. If you have people using generative AI to write their research, which is already making a choice, then you've got peer reviewers who are in some cases, I've already run into this with a conference I run, then using generative AI to write the evaluations for the submissions. So when you've got robots reading robots and an editor who's just trying to get things out the door and build an issue, suddenly you've got yourself a whole journal issue filled with writing by robots. Now, this gets aggregated somewhere else. Someone else cites the findings of the abstracts and thinks they've got embedded peer-reviewed scientific information. And now we have a spiraling problem. What one of the folks in my field, Matthew Kirschenbaum, calls the potential text apocalypse, which is to say that we will have so much generated text out there that has vagaries and misinformation that in turn gets trained into all of our tools that it'll be difficult to find good content. And has anyone noticed how hard it is to find good content already?
Just out of curiosity, is there a list of respectable journals? Because I mean, there's a ton out there, and I'm into plants, but I come across the geology thing, and it's like, well, I don't know if this is a paid for content kind of journal, or is it a peer review?
So there are three main things you can look at to decide whether you trust a scientific journal. The first thing is, does it have a requirement of a payment to have an article reviewed or published? Normally, this information is on the submission page, and if it has that requirement, it's probably not very trustworthy. There is an exception that some scientific journals that are open access, which means you can view them without paying for any of the articles, will have a fee that's an open access fee, but that fee should only be payable after an article is peer reviewed, and there should usually be some sort of language about subsidies for graduate students and things like that. That is probably okay. But any other type of payment is your big red flag. So first thing you look at is that submission page. The second thing you look at is the editorial board for the journal. Do these sound like people who are from decent institutions that you've heard of? Are they people who potentially sound like they have expertise that's relevant? Like if you're looking at a journal that's specifically on Florida plants and the board is all people not from the United States, you might have some questions about whether this journal is actually a journal that's really engaged with this region in its work. And then kind of the third thing is kind of doing your own reality check, looking at the types of articles that are there, looking at the abstracts, looking at kind of whether it's cited by other people or has a high impact factor, which will be listed on most journal pages. That'll tell you kind of that final step of credibility. If those other two things look good and that seems solid, then you're probably dealing with a peer-reviewed, credible source. But it's going to get harder and harder. And there's also the challenges that on editorial board pages, sometimes people lie. So I know it's shocking to hear that people are lying on the internet.
Journals that have been around for years and years and years that are always have been credible, are they falling for this?
So places like Nature and Science are working really, really hard, right? But the reality is that journals that are already running on a shoestring budget in some cases with tired academics are more likely to let something through. Now, if it's a journal that enough people read to have a community that's going to call them out on it, it usually only happens once. Is that, well, at least right now. But I'm very cognizant of the fact that as these tools get better, we're going to be relying more on a labor of moderation that requires everyone to be engaged. It is work to moderate content. It is work to recognize things that are inaccurate. It is fundamentally the case that we can take some of these tools right now to create convincing content at a glance. And the fact that 11,300 papers so far in that one publisher set ended up being inaccurate speaks to the fundamental scale of this problem for all of our knowledge. So what can we do about it? Well, I'm here today in part talking about this to build awareness, so that when we're going and having these conversations and looking at images, text, research that we might rely upon, that we're bringing a level of suspicion that's appropriate for the tools, that we are thinking about attribution and sources, and doing that, taking that next step of understanding how this is going to be part of a changing ecosystem. Right? Taking some time after this and working with some of these tools yourself and seeing it if you haven't, be really helpful for getting a sense of how much it's changing. When you hear a new model is released, it's useful to even just look at an article someone has written about what it's capable of. Because it'll really give you some perspective on what's going to be available and circulating through all of your social media feeds in the near future. And then, of course, I love that it can't spell moderation. I love it. That is another AI-generated image, and you can see it's getting better at text. Awareness and understanding were right. That would not have been true on the last version of this model, DALL-E. But it still can't quite get moderation. Probably because not enough people have asked for it. But moderation, right? This is where all of us who have the ability to curate what we forward and circulate to people, but also if you're in a role of responsibility for any group or organization, you can stop things from moving forward to another audience. You can stop them from confusing the next readership. And that's really where the direct intervention, if you see one of your friends has posted about the Santa Cardinal or something like that, it's a great opportunity for education. And so realize that the Santa Cardinal is one thing, but I am talking, of course, about the type of misinformation that's going to happen in everything that has high stakes, political stakes. So you're going to see this really ramp up over the next few months.
Is there a source like Snow that you could go to that would tell you if something's true or not?
When something gets viral enough or enough attention, it will show up in those sorts of fact-checking things. But kind of the reality is that it's a process. And there's a great article, and I can share out the slides that Audubon has on kind of spotting these sorts of fakes, right? A lot of this is, just kind of working through your actions. If it's not something that's been reported, where else does that image appear? You can do a reverse image source or search for a text that you found and see where else it pops up. You can also think about what are the kinds of emotions? What's it trying to make you do? Is it's trying to convince you, for instance, that the part of Split Oak Forest they're going to put a highway through is just a completely dead area, nothing's there, and gives you a bunch of convincing photos of no wildlife and some trash heaps and says, this is what Split Oak Forest is. Then it's trying to make you do something. It's trying to make you not care about conservation. So when you look at that, when it has a purpose like that, or is it trying to make you buy something? Is it trying to convince you to take an action or inaction? And if it doesn't have any mention of who's running it and who are the sources, if you can't even figure out how this thing got started, then that's warrants suspicion. And I do recommend reading that whole article and recognizing that in the plant world especially, the desire for beautiful things is part of what motivates this, the desire for that to be a real orchid. All right, my orchid folks in the room, how to do. Thank you.